Now, before we take a closer look at this, let's answer some questions about the text, because the text is strange. Why does the book of Esther begin with chapter 11, verse 2, and end with chapter 11, verse 1? Or, depending on which Bible you have, begin with chapter A and end with chapter F. Did anyone else have that problem? There you go, not a problem. You read the footnotes. Good for you. All right, here's the story behind that. There is a 10-chapter version of the book of Esther. That's the Jewish and Protestant version. If you only read 10 chapters of Esther, you skipped all the confusion, but you're going to miss some of the material tonight, too. Then there's the 16-chapter version of the book of Esther, the Catholic and Orthodox version. So if you've got a Catholic Bible, that's what you read. It's amazing. I think more than any other book in the Bible, the text of Esther in Catholic Bibles really varies. All right, here's what's going on. The short version, the 10-chapter version, is older. It was written in Hebrew, probably right around the time of Alexander the Great, maybe a little before him. Because we don't hear too much about the Greeks in the story. I think they'd find some way to put it in if Alexander the Great had already come by. It was a very popular story, and in the Greek Septuagint, people added more details to the story that were left out of the original version, probably over the course of 250 years. That's the long version. That's what's in the Catholic Bible. When St. Jerome translated the Latin Vulgate Bible around 400 AD, he translated the Hebrew version of Esther, but took the parts from the Greek version and placed them in an appendix at the end of the book, where they were readable and accessible, but totally out of context. Then, during the 13th century, Bibles were separated into chapters for the first time. The book of Esther was labeled with chapters 1 through 16, even though the material was wildly out of order. So, in today's Catholic Bibles, the material has been put back in its proper order, but the chapters and verses will forever remain a mess. The ABC, or the Greek parts, they're the parts that got put back in after Jerome put them into the appendix. And in my New American Bible, they're done by letter. In my Revised Standard Version Bible, they're done by numbered chapter, 11 through 16. So if you're reading the New American Bible, which most of you are, you're going to have the Hebrew version with the numbers and the Greek parts of the text with letters.
Hebrew is the Protestant?
Yeah, and the Hebrew-only version is the Protestant version, and the longer version with numbers and letters is the Catholic version. Okay, this is really random. Chapter 11, verse 1 is not in a lot of the Bibles. It's in this one. I'll read it out of this one. Chapter 11, verse 1. In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said that he was a priest and a Levite, and Ptolemy his son, brought to Egypt the preceding letter of Purim, which they said was genuine and had been translated by Lysimachus, the son of Ptolemy, one of the residents of Jerusalem. It's a translation note. Somehow that got left in and was made chapter 11, verse 1. Most Bibles leave it out now. All right, another translation issue. Who is the king in this book? Ahasuerus? Xerxes? Or Artaxerxes? Okay, there's only one king in this book, but they can't decide on his name. The Hebrew version gives the Persian name Ahasuerus. This is better known to us in Greek as Xerxes. Same guy. Ahasuerus in Persian, Xerxes in Greek. But the Septuagint translates the name Artaxerxes, which is the name of a slightly later king. That's probably a mistranslation. The king is probably Xerxes. One more language curiosity. Mordecai's got a Babylonian name, Marduk. In Hebrew, it's Mordecai. Esther, on the other hand, has a Hebrew name, Hadassah. Seems like she started going by Esther when she went to live at the palace. They both got two names, just like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Finally, is this book history or historical fiction? The short answer, probably history. Anyone want the long answer?
Probably not.
The long answer is, the end of Esther tells us that the book was written to explain the Jewish feast of Purim. So if they're already holding a feast to commemorate this, it makes sense that it's based on something that actually happened. You can also find fun tidbits in the history books that tie into Esther. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us that after Xerxes was defeated in the Greco-Persian Wars, he went home and took comfort in his harem, which is exactly what we see happening in the book of Esther. Mordecai is mentioned under the name Marduk in the annals of the Persian kings. And let's see. So while the book of Esther was written about 150 years after the events it describes, there's good reason to think this is basically history. All right, any questions about the text or its history?
Do we have Persian history going back that far?
Yes, we do.
And is she mentioned in that?
No, Esther is not mentioned. The other queen, Vashti, is not mentioned either.
What about the decree killing all the Jews?
That is not mentioned either. So that's why some scholars think that maybe this isn't based on history. I don't think that's a strong enough argument. When it comes to ancient history, you're going to have so many more omissions than you will telling every detail of what actually happened. Plus, you expect the names of queens to be left out. They generally are. Yeah, they're just not going to give a list of all the queens. Any more than they did for, say, Solomon back in 1 Kings. All right, let's dig into the story. The book of Esther opens with a dream. Mordecai dreamed that two great dragons came forth to fight. At their roaring, every nation prepared for war to fight against the nation of the righteous. The righteous cried out to God for help, and a tiny stream became a great river. Light came and the sun rose, the lowly were exalted, and consumed those held in honor. This reminds me of the book of Luke, describing the coming of Jesus. The dawn from on high shall break upon us, to shine on those in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. And, of course, the Magnificat of Mary, God has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. That's what Mordecai foresees in his dream. The salvation of the Jews, then and later. At the time, Mordecai does not understand this dream. But at the end of the book, Mordecai interprets his dream for us. The two dragons are Haman and himself. The nations gather to destroy Israel, but Israel cries out to God and is saved. The trickle of water that turns into a rushing river is Queen Esther. And when Mordecai sees just how God has fulfilled this dream, he declares that the salvation of the nation has come from God. This prophetic dream is notable as the only supernatural event of the book of Esther. Like the book of Judith, God isn't present here in signs and wonders, or in the words of prophets, or in a voice from heaven. He's here in the courage and prayers of his people who pray, muddle along the best they can, and choose to do the right thing. Esther and Mordecai choose to do the right thing, even when God seems absent. But because they did the work of God, they can look back at the end of the story and see how God was at work through them the whole time. Think for a moment of Moses, who on Mount Sinai was not permitted to see the face of God, only his back. That's usually how we see God best in our lives. We see his back. We see him after he has passed by. Can you look back and see how God has been at work in your life?